Sergey Viktorovich, you are certainly someone our citizens need no introduction to. But I know how to surprise them with your Sinhalese language skills. Could you say hello in Sinhalese? Ayubowan Sapasidipa Kahumada. For the second time, you are in United Russia's top 5 federal campaign list. What does this mean to you? Of course, it is teamwork. And naturally, there is probably one person ultimately responsible. You probably know exactly who. Is this trust, recognition, or an extra burden? Or a reward?
It is definitely trust. That goes without saying. But the main thing for me is the leadership's decision to nominate me to this top 5, approved at the United Russia Congress, though I have good relations with all parliamentary parties, without exception. By working with all Duma factions and parties, we want them to help pass laws that anchor our foreign policy, making it as effective as possible and backed by broad support.
Одобрять законы, которые закрепляют наш внешнеполитический курс, с тем, чтобы он максимально был эффективным и опирался на широкую поддержку.
My presence in the top 5, decided by the leadership, also reflects the very challenging period our country is going through right now.
Которое связано с очень непростым периодом, который сейчас переживает страна.
A period that crucially depends on how we conduct the special military operation against those who unleashed war on Russia.
Специальную военную операцию против тех, кто развязал войну против России.
This includes our fighters on the front line and the home front in every sense. And on the other hand, foreign policy and diplomacy are also meant to play a major supporting role.
Она тоже призвана сыграть очень большую сопровождающую роль.
Given how all our Western interlocutors try to deceive us, promising one thing and doing another, which we should be used to by now, though we still naturally want to believe in the best.
Ну, мы к этому уже привыкли, должны были бы привыкнуть, но каждый раз хочется, знаете, по состоянию русской души верить в лучшее.
But patience eventually runs out. It is no coincidence that shortly after the special military operation began, the president, commenting on our relations with the West and Europe, concluded that things will never be the same as they were before February 2022.
The West has simply gone mad. No one intends to follow any agreements, even old ones that worked for decades. And of course, everything is breaking down. We know and feel this. In this situation, what alternative do we have to offer the world?
First, we must defend our legitimate interests. To offer anything to the world, we must win. The world is watching with great attention, and some with bated breath, to see how this war, imposed on us by the West and in response to which the President announced the special military operation, will end. It is not that we are surrounded by unprincipled people on this planet, but that is life. Everyone wants to know where the strength lies, to paraphrase Sergey Lavrov. You are absolutely right that they no longer try to hide or mask anything. At first, they openly declared the goal of inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia. Watching the situation on the front line, they temporarily backed away from that rhetoric. Now, as Zelensky constantly retreats in Donbass and other areas, he has turned out of desperation to outright terrorist activity.
Когда он перешел от безысходства к откровенно террористической деятельности,
and seeing his long-range weapons hit targets, they began to promote this phase as a turning point, claiming that Ukraine can defeat the aggressor, Russia, which would otherwise conquer Europe next. So the slogan of strategic defeat is back, alongside calls for Russia's decolonization, which openly means partitioning our country. This revives the hopes the West had during the collapse of the Soviet Union, when they saw separatist movements in the Far East, the Urals, and the Caucasus, hoping everything would fall apart so they could pick up the pieces.
Подразумевается расчленение нашей страны в очередной раз. Возрождение тех надежд, которые на этапе исчезновения Советского Союза тоже Запад испытывал, глядя, как на Дальнем Востоке, на Урале сепаратистские движения появились, не говоря уже про Кавказ, и лелея надежду на то, что все это сейчас развалится, и можно было по кусочку подбирать.
They were probably already figuring out who would get what.
And we were just one step away from that, right? We had Urals francs in circulation.
Of course, yes. Everything was on the brink.
Все было на грани.
And the fact that Boris Yeltsin found the courage to hand over power early?
Нашел в себе, прямо скажу, мужество передать власть досрочно.
And handed it to the only person who, at that moment, could save Russia.
На тот момент смог сохранить Россию.
Well, you see, it was a turning point in history, which probably shows that Russia is blessed by God, and when things get really tough, we get help from above.
Тяжело, нам помогают свыше.
But now, when they talk of a strategic defeat again, and actively support our...
поддерживают активно наших...
These Ralokins, who set up anti-Russian groups in Europe to raise funds for some underground struggle to split the Russian Federation, they don't even hide it anymore.
Продолжение какой-то подпольной борьбы за раскол Российской Федерации, они уже этого абсолютно не скрывают.
Our main TV channels show everything the West is plotting.
Запад замышляет.
It's important for everyone to see this, to understand the situation is serious. The president doesn't hide it.
Президент этого не скрывает.
The nations belonging to the self-proclaimed civilized world have now collectively decided to gang up against us.
Before the 2007 Munich speech, they loved us and embraced us. At least now, everything is more honest.
They thought we were in their pocket. When President Putin came to power, he was completely open to an equal strategic partnership with the West.
Стратегическому партнерству с Западом.
Our former allies, namely the Anglo-Saxons, London more fiercely, the US slightly less, are fighting us through Ukraine, pumping it with advanced weapons and promising to make new lethal high-tech air defense systems just for them.
Украину, накачивая ее самыми современными вооружениями, объявляя о том, что они будут производить специально для Украины новые смертоносные и высокотехнологичные противоракетные системы.
This has simply never happened before.
Просто ведь такого не было никогда.
We started the special military operation when society was peaceful, comfortable, and generally satisfied with its standard of living.
Комфортно, удовлетворено в целом своим жизненным уровнем и
The fact that the West didn't like this either is true. They didn't want society to be calm. They wanted to turn society against the government. And we're preparing provocations. They cannot compete fairly.
конкурировать честно.
They fear fair competition in everything. Hence the sanctions.
Отсюда санкции.
To hold on to positions slipping away after 500 years of Western dominance.
После 500-летнего доминирования Запада.
So, again, our society's state matters to me as a citizen and as foreign minister.
Для меня, как гражданина, как министра иностранных дел,
implementing the president's foreign policy, which must reflect the public mood, they naturally want to stir up trouble here.
Они хотят смуту здесь соорудить.
Just recently, President Vladimir Putin himself made a point of mentioning that our forces are actively making progress on a daily basis. While this progress is not as rapid as we would prefer, this deliberate pace is necessary to save our soldiers' lives on the front line. Meanwhile, the adversary is trying to offset their military failures along the contact line by resorting to terrorist attacks aimed at disrupting our citizens' daily lives. Well, even in Moscow and St. Petersburg, these drone attacks are felt. And what is happening in the border areas, in the border?
В приграничных
Regions of the Russian Federation, they are simply experiencing all the hardships of martial law, and I'm very proud, honestly, that our people take it correctly, as history and those who defeated Nazism taught us.
Народ это воспринимает правильно, воспринимает как положено, как нам история велела, и как велели нам те, кто победил нацизм.
This is especially true now that we find ourselves fighting against those who are the direct followers and physical descendants of those original Nazis. In the same lineup, Merz openly says we will be leading Europe again.
Опять главные в Европе.
If you are that candid, then be ready.
Ну, будь готов.
You said before offering the world an alternative order, we must secure our national interests, which means we must win. What are our national interests on the global stage?
So we remain an independent power, an independent civilization.
Самостоятельной цивилизацией.
So our borders are secure, so no one even thinks of telling us how to live within Russia. And so all peoples of the Russian Federation continue to live.
Советовать, как устраивать свою жизнь внутри России, и чтобы все народы Российской Федерации продолжали
enjoying constitutionally guaranteed rights to education, culture, traditions, and their religious beliefs.
На сохранение культуры, традиций, своих религиозных убеждений.
In this capacity, Russia will want to cooperate on equal terms with other emerging major centers, like China and India.
Центрами, которые формируются, это и Китай, и Индия.
So these major players, along with us, will champion justice, hoping the West will eventually come to its senses.
В надежде на то, что Запад тоже когда-то придет в себя.
Europe in particular, and be ready to fit honestly and equally into these new relations.
На равных, по-честному встраиваться вот в эти новые системы отношений.
For now, it is not ready, and the United States is absolutely not ready either. And so, we wait.
Ожидание.
As this drags on, these new power centers are building their own networks, like BRICS, which attracts the leading economies of the global majority to solve issues, unlike NATO, where America commands, and everyone obsequiously tries to please the hegemon.
Делается в том же НАТО, где Америка командует, и все пытаются так вот подобострастно каким-то образом ублажить гегемона.
And certainly not like the EU, where the Brussels bureaucracy has usurped the rights of national governments. Neither in BRICS, nor in the CO, nor in the Eurasian Economic Union, the CIS, or the CSTO, can anyone find a single instance of Russia, China, or anyone else in the SCO and BRICS demanding things.
Кто-либо другой стали требовать чего-то.
No, there are always honest,
Откровенные,
mutually respectful talks aimed at compromise. 35,000 sanctions is probably an all-time record in human history. How do we withstand this? Thanks first of all to our ancestors who built the richest, largest country in the world, with access to seas and oceans that lets us develop trade and secure ourselves with the Navy.
Которые такую страну создали, богатейшую страну в мире, самую большую страну в мире, выходящую на моря, океаны, что позволяет развивать и торговлю, обеспечивать нашу безопасность с подключением военно-морского флота.
Of course, the industrialization that began in the Russian Empire is widely discussed now, with railways connecting the country and the foundations of ferrous metallurgy laid then, and certainly industrialization under the Soviet Union.
Металлургии и, безусловно, индустриализация уже при Советском Союзе.
In a very short time, in just a decade or 15 years before,
До
the start of the Great Patriotic War, colossal achievements were made, and this also largely helped prevent a catastrophe.
Могло не допустить катастрофы.
But still, our main,
Главным нашим
National quality is something the West lacks. In our civilization, it is respect for those who built it, who built cities, who defeated enemies. We had Gorchakov's era after the Crimean War, when he said Russia is not angry, Russia is focusing, when we suffered a defeat for reasons we need not discuss now.
Были у нас времена и Горчакова после Крымской войны, когда он сказал, Россия не сердится, Россия сосредотачивается, когда мы потерпели поражение, по причинам, которых сейчас нет смысла говорить.
But we shouldn't get angry now either.
Не сердиться.
Getting angry is the worst. It just wastes your energy. We need to focus and... But a healthy anger is quite appropriate. Not to fume, but to find a healthy anger. Anger in terms of needing to speed up in everything. In achieving a technological breakthrough, which is much talked about now, and to fiercely decide that we must do this, get angry at ourselves, wanting to achieve this faster. And we need the same healthy anger on the external front, without any hysterics, but having realized internally that we must only trust but verify.
Внутри себя сделав вывод, что только проверяй.
We will worry about trust later. Verify first, and most importantly, stick to your guns. Now our Turkish neighbors say they are ready to help on Ukraine again, but at the same time sign NATO documents stating the Kiev regime's territorial integrity must be restored.
Надо восстановить территориальную целостность киевского режима.
There are other proposals. The current US administration says they will deal with Iran first and then help us.
Вновь говорит, что вот мы сейчас только с Ираном разберемся и потом будем вам помогать.
We have our army and navy,
Армия, флот,
and now our aerospace forces for quite some time, unmanned systems, and we have the people. So when they say, let's settle it somewhere, let things stay as they are, freeze it at the line of contact, and then look for a compromise. Firstly, we have a sense of historical continuity, our historical identity, and multinational pride.
У нас есть еще, во-первых, ощущение исторической непрерывности, нашей исторической идентичности и национальной гордости, многонациональной гордости.
So when the West says we will think about when we, the West, decide to resume talks with you, but these talks will involve Europe, America, Zelensky, and Putin.
Чтобы сидела Европа, сидела Америка, Зеленский, Путин.
And before that, a truce and ceasefire must be declared.
Объявить перемирие, прекращение огня.
After a ceasefire, we Westerners will deploy a multinational force led by France and Britain. And then we'll sit down and talk. What does this mean? It is an ultimatum. The Nazi regime will remain. Everything freezes at the line of contact. We won't recognize any territories where you held referendums. But the character of our people is unique because
Оно все-таки уникально тем, что
remember the Soviet song, Our Own Pride? It didn't just appear with the Soviets. Russians always had it. And that pride remains.
Sergey Viktorovich, what were you like as a kid in the yard? You mentioned healthy anger, and I thought that's interesting. Did you fight or use diplomacy? We all know the rule. If a fight is inevitable, strike first. We know whose rule that is. But what was yours?
I grew up basically in the countryside, in Noginsk, formerly Bogorodsk. I support restoring the name Bogorodsk. I am currently working actively with the Moscow region, with my friend Andrei Vorobyov. There are already some local name changes, but the city itself still remains Noginsk. And the part of it where I lived was purely rural. To the left of the train station was the city, and to the right were 2 rows of wooden houses with basic village amenities.
Как они оборудованы в деревнях, и
Truth be told, when trains arrived, we boys would run to where the freight cars were parked to see what they had brought.
Товарный поезд оставался, смотрел, что там в товарных вагонах привезли.
If there were watermelons, we would cause some mischief.
Sergey Viktorovich, we know a lot about you. The whole country does. But we have never asked about your grandparents.
Бабушках и дедушках.
Who were they?
Кем они были?
Whose genes are in your blood? Whose abilities? Whose talents? My parents divorced when I was only a few months old.
Месяцев.
They both graduated from the Institute of Foreign Trade, which is now part of MGIMO. That is why my mother lobbied for my attempt to enter MGIMO, and quite successfully so.
Безуспешно это делала.
And after their graduation placement, they went to work at our customs office in Brest. But then, as fate would have it, I ended up living only with my mother. My grandmother was in Noginsk.
В Ногинске.
She was a head nurse there.
Старшая медсестра.
My grandfather was also a railway station master. In Noginsk, he spent the entire war managing troop trains sent to the front. His two brothers fought on the front lines. Both returned. My grandfather died early, quite young, at 67, but my grandmother lived longer.
Вот, а бабушка пожила подольше.
She later moved in with us in Moscow, and I loved them dearly. They were true friends to me.
Любил, они были мне по-настоящему друзьями.
They would shield me if they felt I had done something my mother might not like.
Не понравится. Ну, так.
As is usually the case, roots play a kind of invisible role.
Какую-то незримую роль играют.
Maybe you don't even think, oh, I have so many generations behind me. That is not the point. The point is that you are living on their behalf, just like we are fighting now for those who defeated the Germans.
Немцев.
And the rest of Europe with them.
You do rafting. Is that still true?
Around 1984 or 1985, our group of friends decided to go camping in the wild.
У нас компания решила отдыхать по-дикому.
And one of our friends,
Друзей,
he was a year ahead in school.
Ему,
He was originally from Ufa. He just invited us, along with another friend, to spend a week in Ufa for the summer, to go to the river and fish.
Походить на речку, рыбу половить.
We went to the river. There are lakes there too. We got a boat and went for a row. We fished on the Belaya River. It has almost no current, barely moving, smooth and calm. So for the next year, we gathered a team of 5.
Команду 5 человек.
We chose the Bia River in Altai,
Уже на Алтае.
the river that flows out of Lake Teletskoye. But before going, we learned that several rivers flow into Lake Teletskoye,
Несколько рек,
including the Chulishman River, which is very, very rough. We looked into options and finally
в
agreed.
итоге согласовали.
We went about 20 kilometers up this very difficult river from Lake Teletskoye.
Сложной реке.
It threw us back into the lake, and by some miracle we all stayed on the rafts and didn't capsize. Then a motorboat towed us across Lake Teletskoye, and we rafted down the Bia. And after that, we visited the Katun River for the first time and traveled it top to bottom.
И сколесили ее сверху донизу.
The upper and middle sections, where the Rafting World Cup is held, have Class 4 to 4.5 rapids, with some Class 5 elements. And once we rafted from Mount Beluga itself, a very interesting route, but on the first day.
Маршрут, только надо первые сутки.
At the very beginning, the water barely moves across the flat terrain, but then it suddenly drops down quite sharply. Along that particular stretch of the river, you encounter 5 incredibly tough rapids, which instantly send your adrenaline levels completely off the charts.
Did you capsize?
My raft didn't. We used 2 rafts. Our colleagues flipped a couple of times, but we pulled them out. Over the years, we have spent nearly 20 entire summer seasons of our lives traveling and navigating along the waters of the Katun River. We have many friends there, and it's a fantastic region.
Край фантастический.
By evening, you pull ashore, drag the raft out, build a campfire, and pitch a tent. And then, a guitar and songs?
A guitar and songs. Yes, a guitar and songs.
How many songs do you play on the guitar? Roughly. You probably haven't counted.
Well, I really like Vysotsky and Okudjava.
You both play and sing.
Yes, yes.
Will we ever hear you, Sergey Viktorovich? We really must.
I'll take advantage of your media presence.
Пространстве.
No royalties needed. If anyone is interested, I accept your offer.
Принимаю ваше предложение.
We'd really love to hear that. Sergey Viktorovich, we are interested in everything, because journalists love not only to watch you, but also to eavesdrop, especially when you think the microphone is off. Remember, if you had trademarked that one word, morons, you would probably be a rich man by now. Because practically all my colleagues, including myself, wore that t-shirt. It was sold in thousands and thousands of copies. Is this your character? Or does it just slip out depending on the situation?
Well, it slips out. We are all human after all.
But your colleagues say you never allow such things at work.
What liars? Oh, really? I've shown them. That is, of course, a very hypocritical statement. No, when something suddenly, not even upsets you, but someone unexpectedly does something wrong, sometimes a sharp word slips out. As for trademarks, I never thought about that.
Бывает горячее словцо. А насчет торговой марки никогда об этом не задумывался.
By the way, after Alaska, where I appeared in a USSR sweater, people called my assistants, thanked them, and said they were ready.
Моим помощникам благодарили, говорили, что готовы.
Well, they were ready to knit these kinds of sweaters for all of my friends. I believe that when people are drawn to this, of course, there have always been many who felt this way, but now we are seeing a very special and powerful wave of nostalgia for the USSR. It essentially brings us right back to what we started our discussion with. People do not simply want a good, prosperous, and comfortable life. They also genuinely want to feel a deep sense of belonging to what their ancestors accomplished under the most difficult conditions, raising this entire country up, pulling it out of extreme poverty, and creating the necessary conditions for 100 different languages to coexist in peace.
Для того, чтобы сосуществовали сотни языков.
When people put on these sweaters, they feel it. Even those who did not live in the Soviet Union, but were told about it by parents or grandparents. So, I think, as Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin said, whoever does not regret the Soviet Union has no heart, and whoever wants to revive it has no brain. Regarding the heart, all of this is kept. As for the head, thank God, in Russia's current situation, we have a head, and it's a sober one.
You already mentioned that our country, our motherland, is kissed and kept by God. Are you yourself a believer?
I am. My grandmother had me baptized in secret from my mother. My mother, who was a committed member of the Communist Party at the time, only ended up getting baptized herself at a much later stage of her life, once she had already reached full adulthood after the collapse of the Soviet Union occurred, but my grandmother took me to Novinsk, on the banks of the Klasma River. There's still a church there. God grant that it continues to active. It was a secret. I still have the baptismal cross they put on me back then. It was a good time.
Has anything ever happened that can only be explained by a miracle, by God?
In your life? Well, yes, probably.
Наверное, случалось.
There are certain stories that I would not necessarily want to recall right now. But I do remember one particular time when we were rafting down the Katun River. We decided to make a stop, got ourselves some horses, and then proceeded to ride all the way up into the mountains. I did equestrian sports in college, so I had some skills. But not all the other guys did. and suddenly the horses bolted as we were heading back down. To our immediate right arose a steep mountain, while on our left side lay what was, in fact, an incredibly deep and perilous abyss. And one of my friends lost control.
Понесло,
And he almost hit me.
меня сбить.
By some miracle, I managed to stop. But speaking of political dramas, if you will, it's probably still the coup.
Если хотите, это, наверное, все-таки путч.
I am returning to where we started. Back then, they thought, fine, Russia is compliant. They believed that Russia was obedient, and they assumed that it simply needed to comply with and follow whatever specific plans we chose to outline for it. When it turned out Russia was not obedient and had its own pride, which showed even before the 2007 Munich speech you mentioned, where Vladimir Putin just laid it all out honestly and directly. Against a debate that was essentially filled with hypocrisy. Prior to that point, there had been clear signs as well, but we still held on to the hope that the West would eventually reconsider, believing that these were merely temporary relapses, which they would ultimately be able to overcome. Take the Baltics. Back in 2004, immediately after I had first assumed my position as minister, and they were starting to pull the Baltic states into the subsequent wave of NATO's eastward expansion, the president directly turned to them and asked, "Why exactly are you doing this?" We had an agreement, and they went on to explain, saying, "You have to understand that ever since the Soviet era, they have felt that they were occupied and heavily oppressed. And that fear still remains. If we admit them to NATO and the EU, they will calm down." And did they calm down? At this very moment, they have become the primary instigators directed against us, which is highly ironic despite the famously hot-headed nature that those Estonian guys are traditionally known for. Lithuania and Latvia have now stated that they are lifting the ban on hosting nuclear weapons on their territory. So we must rely only on ourselves, as the President has repeatedly stressed.
Как президент и неоднократно подчеркивал.
But if we are talking about a trend, yes, it exists. There are severe consequences of what is happening, especially nearby. But I want to emphasize and declare this once again. We are today completing the heroic work of both our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers, who fought and destroyed Nazism, while those who were once our former allies saved this Nazism. We know the fate of the Wehrmacht generals who found both shelter and a home in the West. And now, what should have never? No one could have ever thought this would happen, but Nazism is openly reviving, and no one even hides it. So, we have no other choice if we want to remain our Russian civilization.
Нашей русской цивилизации.
One final question, Sergey Viktorovich. What does the word motherland mean to you?
Слово «родина».
Russia. Life. The most important thing. The most important thing. Thank you. Russia is life, and life is Russia.